Getting it said for Quinnipiac Island, Newport County. Well, today the big story nationally is the passing of Ponzi King, as he's called, Bernie Madoff, and the only person that Madoff spoke to during his imprisonment was Jim Campbell, who happens to follow us here on WADK at 1 o'clock every day. And Jim has a book coming out called Madoff Talks. And Jim Campbell joins me on the line. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Bruce. Thanks for having me on short notice. Something must have happened today.
Yeah, there was just a minor little story. You've been quite the man about the media today. You just came off a national radio interview, and we're pleased that you could give us a little bit of time here to talk about this. It really is quite something. I mean, this man goes down in history as one of the great crime figures, doesn't he?
He does, and I must say thanks for having me on. You run my show at 1, so I love Newport. I love WADK. You know, if I put Bernie on the couch for a little bit, it's really an unfathomable story almost, because A, he didn't do it for greed, which everybody would assume naturally that he would.
Yeah.
Two, he built from scratch the third largest market maker on Wall Street. It was totally ethical. I mean, beyond Wall Street standards. It was innovative. It was worth $3 billion at peak without the hedge fund that was the Ponzi scheme. And at the same time, through the same period, he built the biggest in Wall Street history, at reaching $65 billion of fake Ponzi returns his investors thought he had. And what that could reside in one man, it was perhaps the single most fascinating thing for me, because you would think that, oh, he's running this great business, something bad happened, bad trade or whatever, which is what he told me, a story that he hadn't told anybody else. And that he said, oh, I got to double down. I got to try and make it back, and blah, 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 we'll be back all set, like everybody does with Ponzi schemes.
Yeah.
or big gambling losses. And so I hear his story, I go research it afterwards, and I'll be damned, he was building them both side by side from the start, from the early 1970s. I'll tell you on the couch as well, he's not a pure sociopath, which is what you would think. He treated his firm like a family. He paid sudden medical expenses. He paid for honeymoons traditionally. He paid very well. So on that sense, he was not just a pure guy with no empathy. On the other hand, he did not have a lot of empathy for his victims. He felt that they harassed him. They were greedy. He couldn't say no. They kept wanting returns, on and on and on. And his mind was totally compartmentalized, which was how he was able to keep it from anybody else. Nobody saw the whole picture but him. The firm itself was designed that way, with what call on Wall Street Chinese walls. So people only saw their piece of the pie. On the 17th floor, he has these guys behind lock and key, and they are literally don't even know what they're doing, other than it's not very savory. On the 19th floor, he's got all this modern high-tech equipment, top graduates from business schools, his two sons running it, and it's like the front of a mafia restaurant. The front looks legitimate, then you go to the basement, and a lot of bad stuff is going on.
Oh, man.
And how he built this, out of one mind is really one of the most intriguing aspects of Bernie Madoff.
So the compartmentalizing is fascinating, because that puts him right in with any of the great criminal masterminds of all time. But what did you back on your couch there, Jim Campbell, was he messianic? Did he believe that he have, some kind of a complex that he really believed that he could do this and triumph and make it all right?
He did have a sort of a megalomaniac messianic side to him. His secretary once said that, the legitimate secretary, and he had to go look it up. He didn't even know what she was talking about.
I don't know why it strikes me funny, but it strikes me funny.
On the other hand, he's not like a Donald Trump in the sense that he needs to be out front. He's actually very much behind the scenes kind of guy, and he could not be wrong, or he could not have any losses. It was a psychic injury to him, which, by the way, is similar to Trump not being able to accept losing the election.
Yeah.
there is that similarity in that point. They're both out of Queens. I don't know if there's something in the water
Could
there.
be something there.
or not.
Does that explain the Mets, though, Jim?
Well, by the way, the Mets are in the book, too, because the Wilpons lost $400 million with him. So that's all in the book, too, you'll find very interesting. The book has got a lot of revelation. People are going to be surprised how little they know about the entire story. Plus, I'm the first media source that's going to say whether Ruth, Andrew, and Mark knew or were complicit in the scheme, which the Fed said they were. So hopefully people will read it. Yeah, Bruce, he was such a control freak that he even had a couple of affairs which really had more to do with controlling his investors than it did with sex.
Yeah.
Bernie went to the ends of the earth to try to keep this damn thing going.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, and
Sure.
I'm sure I can't imagine I'm the first to ask you these, but maybe I am. The inevitable comparisons to Trump. Were the traits of Bernie Madoff the traits that we accuse or that some accuse Trump of having?
Let me tell you something interesting story about Trump. Trump is a braggadocio.
Right.
So he said at one point, Bernie tried to get me into his fund, but it just didn't smell right, like he's always right. So I said, Bernie, did Trump try and get in your fund? He said, not only is that untrue, I wouldn't have touched him. He's such a blowhard, he would have blown everything up. So I think he shares with Trump this inability to deal with and face a loss, but he does not share with Trump. Trump has this compulsion to be out front, to get publicity, to get known as much as he possibly can in any way that he can. And also Bernie is a non-con man, and Trump is about as out front a con man as you can find.
Well, so you compare the two of them and you wonder who's the real con man.
I told Bernie that you're such a good con man, Bernie, because you weren't a con. Yes. You weren't trying to be a con man at all. He had everybody else sending the money to him. He never said anything. It just flew into him. And, he went through this rationale of this investment strategy called split strike conversion that nobody understood, but it was really very simple and completely implausible.
If we can compartmentalize for a second, I know your time is a premium, and you got to take a rest a little bit because you've just been in the media for the last couple of hours. But talking with Jim Campbell, Madoff Talks is his book. He'll be on the radio here at 1:00 this afternoon here on WADK, and we're so happy to have some time live with Jim Campbell today. But have you looked into? Let's compartmentalize for a minute. Take the unsavoriness, the illegality, the victimization out of it, right?
The compartmentalization fits brilliantly with the way Wall Street is organized. Wall Street's organized in sort of very discrete, separate modules, and there's regulatory purposes for Chinese walls. If you're on the trading desk, and the investment bankers down the hall are about to do a merger deal, if that information gets to the trading desk, that's inside information, right?
Right.
So Bernie he kept the 17th floor separate from the 19th floor, the legitimate floor. His own sons didn't even have keys to get into the 17th floor. It was behind lock and key. His minions that he hired downstairs had no clue how Wall Street worked. Annette Bongiorno, his right-hand admin person, after 40 years, claimed she didn't even know what the Dow Jones Index was. She never handled a real trade in her life. It was all backdated. Mm-hmm. She seemed which meant, by the way, that's how you create fake profits you already know what the price is.
Right.
Somehow she believed that wasn't illegal, that prices are based on when she entered them in her book. She was paid at the end, gets this $670,000, and had a $58 million IRA that was full of fake money, and she was essentially an administrative assistant. He had one on the 17th floor who was completely honest. He paid her $125,000 and no IRA.
Nah.
But these folks all had little pieces of unsavory activities because there was no real trading going on. They were raiding the bank account, which was at J.P. Morgan, regularly. Frank DePascali is his right-hand man. We call him his Sammy the Gravano?
Sammy the Bull.
His version of Sammy the Bull Gravano, or the chief fraud perpetuating officer. He's the only other one besides Madoff that saw the components, because they automated this whole thing on an antiquated IBM server. He didn't even figure out it was a Ponzi scheme.
Oh, man. It is amazing on so many levels. Madoff Talks. He did. The late Bernie Madoff now passed away 2 hours ago in prison, or that's when they announced it anyway. And did he confide in you, Jim Campbell, some of the things that are coming out in the New York Times story this morning? He knew he was on the way out, knew he was terminally ill. Did he confide any of these in you and maybe give you some insights?
He's been sick for a fairly long time, and he confided in the kidney problems that he had, heart problems that he had. After we had this 400 pages of stuff, I had to go vet how much of it was the truth, and then obviously get a contract with a publishing house. So when I came back, he said that, Jim, I've been asked by the family now to shut my mouth and I don't want to talk anymore. So I had everything I needed and no one else was going to come to him. But that was the end of our communications. I couldn't come back to him then. He was, and then he's just been sick and out of pocket. But he confided. He was very open to confiding the Ponzi scheme and the stuff that he got caught on. Everything else he denied. Brilliant total recall. So we would go through this, and we'll bring another politician, very Nixonian in compelled to rationalize.
Wow. Really amazing. What a study in psychology. They should analyze his brain.
It is. You'll find chapter 9. There's a good chunk on Bernie on the couch.
Unbelievable. Wow. What a story. And it's all in Madoff Talks. Jim Campbell, thanks very, very much for the time. Really incredible. Always good to talk to you. We will do it again.
And we'll be back anytime you'd like me, Bruce. And thanks to all your listeners. Take care.
Not at all. Thanks very, very much. All the best to you, Jim Campbell. And we'll hear you at 1 o'clock. We'll be listening. Jim Campbell and Business Talk coming up at 1 this afternoon. And we kind of bring it to you in real time. It's not, it's what we call taped and timely. We don't use tape anymore. We still say that. But Jim has the best guests, and got to be something going on here, because he was the only person, literally, that Bernie Madoff talked to during his incarceration. You just heard the story. It is the open forum, and we'll get back to Newport County here in a minute. I didn't ask if there was a Newport connection. I have to do that. WADK's exclusive VD Mercedes-Benz VD Volvo Cars of Tiverton.
I'm Jim Campbell, host of Business Talk with Jim Campbell, and now author of the definitive in-depth account of the spectacular rise and fall of Bernie Madoff. Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, including exclusive access to Bernie, Ruth, and Andrew Madoff. What motivated Madoff to commit such a massive fraud, how Madoff managed to keep the scheme hidden in plain sight despite numerous SEC investigations, the true scale of the investment losses, and the victim's ongoing fight for justice.
The book, Madoff Talks, is generating outstanding praise. Leading Wall Street investigative reporter William D. Cohen, New York Times bestselling author of House of Cards, said that Jim Campbell's book is riveting, insightful, but ultimately poignant and sad. How Campbell got the Madoffs and so many others to talk, I'll never know. He's done a great service with this fabulous book. Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story, available now from McGraw Hill.
One of the four, Norm Levy, he was very close to, and worked hand in hand. And when he died, even sort of took care of him to keep control over him. At the same time, he was the executor of his non-real estate assets. He was a big real estate investor. He stole $250 million to pump into his hedge fund. So, how do you fathom this guy? It's an amazing, thing that I have been sort of blessed with to try to diagnose this and get under the hood.
Did he have any friends at the end, Jim? You mentioned that you have a relationship with Ruth, and I know at one point, I think after Mark's suicide, she said she was never going to talk to Bernie again, but surely she must have remained in contact if she hooked you up.
Yeah, she. The first thing is that she's really was almost cult-like controlled by him.
and she had a very hard time decoupling from him. She was 13 years old when they started dating. She believed his rationalizations and minimizations at first. By the time I met her, she was presenting to me, at least, that that he was that she was cutting off relations to the degree she could. He emailed her, he phoned her. They were in communication still. She was also obviously through me funneled stuff to him, but it was very hard for her to get through. To be honest, she was also very hurt, as I say in the book, by some sexual affairs that he had that actually related more to control of his investors than it did to the pure sex. But that's all in the book. You'll find also in the book, I'm the first media source, I believe, to determine if Ruth, Mark, and Andrew were complicit in any way. The FBI and the specific trustee believe that they had to have known. And I've got it's in Chapter 8, folks.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Real quick, how was his time in prison, the 10 years? How hard was it? Did he have any friends or any supporters, or was he really alone?
My understanding was that actually, he's charismatic, and he is a non-con man because he's so low key, and I think he gained a lot of respect. A lot of the prisoners thought he was kind of cool to have pulled off what he pulled off, and he's kind of a survivor that way. He's been sick for a while, though, pretty badly, and isolated, I think, hospital wing.
All right, Jim. Hey, Jim, we really appreciate you taking time here on this really important day. Jim Campbell, he's the author of the upcoming book. It's due out in stores and online on April 27th, entitled Madoff Talks. So that should be very interesting, given the timing that we have here. Jim, thanks so much for joining us here. Let's turn now, Matt, to Barry Ritholtz. We love to get Barry's opinion on all things as it relates to the markets, to trading, to Wall Street. He has his Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's a Bloomberg Opinion columnist. And, of course, he has his podcast here, The Masters in Business. Barry, thanks so much for joining us here. Love to get your thoughts here as we report on the death of Bernie Madoff.
So let's just clarify one thing. Somebody who effectively steals $19 billion from friends, family, charities, lies to his wife, his kids, all of his closest friends for 4 decades, I think the jury has already spoken as to whether or not that person is a sociopath. Just like you can't be a little bit pregnant, you can't be a little bit of a sociopath. He is the textbook, full-blown definition of a sociopath. And I understand the previous author is developed a little bit of a relationship and is kind of immersed in all of the Bernie lore. Perhaps he has lost sight of the forest for the trees, but can we all agree he was a sociopath?
Sounds like one to me, particularly as it relates.
I'm not a psychologist. And I think Jim Campbell, to his credit, spent a lot of time with the victims as well, and he's seen, the devastation. My question is, was he lying? And I think everyone's had this question for a long time. Was he lying to his kids, to Peter? Were they complicit in the fraud? Campbell says he'll tell us in Chapter 8. What do you think, Barry?
So the biggest question to me that relates to that is we know he had a legitimate business. We know he was involved in NASDAQ, and he was a market maker. The question about the fraud is, was it a fraud from day one, or did it begin as a legitimate asset management hedge fund / trading business and somehow morphed into something that was a massive criminal enterprise? And I think if we find the answer to that question, that'll give us some insight as to whether or not the rest of the family knew what was going on, or, theoretically, he started, I think it was the early 60s. So if he was running a legitimate business for 20 or 30 years and somewhere in the middle of that process had a big loss, didn't want to report it, something crazy happened, and started paying off older investors with money from new investors, and it pretty quickly got out of hand, where was that point? If it was from day one, it's hard to imagine the family was completely oblivious.